Hello. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Cincinnati. It's February 9th. I kind of hoped that we were all going to be cast as extras in that movie, but the Hilton did not see it that way. The Hilton reminded me to remind you that the Palm Court has actually been completely relocated to the 4th floor and is around the corner. So the bar is not down there. We have no plausible reason to go and just stroll through the lobby, but I have made my announcement. We have another great program in store. We welcome David Pepper to our program today. David is a 5th-generation Cincinnatian, and he's no stranger to this club. David's career has spanned City Council, the County Commission, and the Ohio Democratic Party. David's here to share some thoughts on writing, art, and politics. Thanks for being here, David. We look forward to your presentation. We're going to begin our meeting, as we do, with the national anthem, followed by the 4-way test and invocation by Jim Hudson. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bomb bursting in air, came through the night, that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Steve. Let's take a minute and pray together. Dear Lord, in the spirit of Valentine's Day coming up just in a few days, we want to focus for a moment on love. First off, I thank you for the precious gift of your love that you've given to the world and to me personally. Thank you for your blessing every day with this love and the power and the strength that I get from you. Please continue to let me feel your comforting love in my life. And Lord, in a room this size, we know that there are people that are experiencing some sort of pain or suffering in their lives. Or we know people who are going through some hard times. May we take your example of love and pass it on to others by being patient, kind, humble, forgiving, trustworthy, protective, comforting, and hopeful. And Lord, we also pray for our meeting today and your blessing upon it. We thank you for our speaker, David, who's going to give of his time and of his wisdom. May we all be inspired by his stories today and his example, that it's an important reminder for us to all be lifelong learners from the stories of our lives. Amen. Now let's remember and say together the 4-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will be beneficial to all concerns. Thank you.
You may be seated. Jim, thank you for that beautiful invocation. Janet and Bill, thank you for that beautiful national anthem. Now to welcome our guests and prospective members, Dr. Hux Miller.
Thank you, President Steve. We have a number of guests today. The first is Emil Brown, a guest of Dr. Charles Pierce, and Emil works for AMSJ International. Emil, please stand. And then we have Sonny Lane, a guest of Dan Long. Sonny works for St. Vincent de Paul. Sonny, please stand. And then we have George McDonald, a guest of Jim Yunker, who is a consultant for, and here I can't read my own writing, but he is a consultant. Please stand, George. This is the problem with having a doctor as the sergeant at arms, isn't it? And then my guest, Rosalind Phillips, who works in Haiti with the Restavik Foundation. And Rosalind, please stand. There you are. And then we have Liz Farmeyer, who is a guest of her father, John, and she is a sophomore at Dartmouth. Liz is majoring in government, and she's on the varsity tennis team. Okay. And then we have Ann Sessler, who is a guest of our speaker, David Pepper, and she is also a consultant with the government. Oh my goodness. Well, she is a consultant. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Hux. Welcome, guests. We hope you come back and you'll join us in service. Now for a new member introduction. Past President Pete Armstrong is going to introduce Darlene Underwood.
He's taller than me. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends and guests. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our new member, Darlene Underwood. Darlene is a Cincinnati native and has raised her family here. She has an older son, 19-year-old twin son and daughter. She has 2 grandchildren, and she is also a great-grandmother. It's a long story, and if you're interested, just ask her. The line forms over here to the right. At an early age, she had the opportunity to form her own business, Anesthesia Medical Management, which is a medical billing service. She operated that business for 30 years, and in 2018 had the opportunity to sell it, upon which she retired. I have known Darlene since about 2009 when I started contra dancing at the Wyoming Fine Arts Center. Darlene is a leader in the folk dance community, both locally and nationally. Dance is a very large part of her life, and in this, she is a much sought-after caller to lead dances, whether here in Cincinnati, Columbus, Louisville, Berea, or other places. And she just told me that this weekend she's leading a 3-day weekend dance down in Knoxville. This role of caller you may envision as a square dance caller, as the job is the same. So she travels many weekends per year around the country to lead dances of up to about 500 participants in complex dances, which, with her precise instructions, run smoothly and end with everybody smiling and nobody hurt. She's also an avid bike rider and a beginning pickleball player. After she sold her business, she asked me about the Rotary Club, so this past summer she started attending meetings with me. It is her vision to get involved with a great community service organization to make our hometown and the world a better place. Please join me in welcoming Darlene Underwood.
We're going to grab a picture. We just, the 3 of you in the center and Pete on the other side. We'll just look at that guy over there. Great. You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Darlene. Welcome to the club. you'll find that this group responds very well to instructions from the microphone, for the most part. Now, please welcome Bill Shula for several Paul Harris Fellow presentations. Bill.
Thank you, President. And I want to thank our Rotarians for all their support for the Rotary International Foundation and polio the Paul Harris Fellowship is named after Paul Harris, who founded Rotary with 3 business associates in Chicago in 1905. The first Rotary service project was in 1906, provided water sanitation and outdoor bathrooms in the Chicago area. Service above self. Arch Clump from Cleveland, Ohio, started the Rotary Foundation in 1917 at the Atlanta International Convention. The first donation was made by a Kansas City Rotary Club in the amount of $26.50. Following the death of Paul Harris in 1947, the foundation increased significantly. In 1957, the Paul Harris Society was formed. To recognize humanitarian giving, the fellowship was established to express appreciation for a contribution of $1,000 or more to the humanitarian and educational programs of the Rotary Foundation. Foundation programs include educational opportunities, food, portable water, health care, immunizations, and shelter for millions of persons around the globe, and address Rotary's 6 areas of focus. It's one of the most solvent foundations in the world. It has a 4-star rating. We added the 7th area of focus in 2022 for environmental issues. Donations made in the amount of $1,000 or more to polio eradication qualifies for this distinction as well. And we began the process to eradicate polio in 1986. We had hoped to eradicate polio by the 100th anniversary of the foundation in 2017 in Atlanta. We are still this close. Also, Rotary Foundation has donated $15 million to the Ukraine humanitarian aid. Most people don't know that. That's outstanding. A $10,000 cash contribution to the foundation qualifies a person for the major donor distinction, and a major donor level 2 is a $25,000 cash donation. So the Paul Harris Fellow, given in appreciation of tangible and significant assistance for the furtherance of better understanding and friendly relations among people in the entire world. And also there's a Paul Harris Society. A member makes a commitment to donate $1,000 a year. They will become a Paul Harris Society member, which I coordinate for the district. So we've had several of our Rotarian members that have received the Paul Harris Fellow this year, and today we're going to recognize 9 individual Rotarians for this award. So as I call your name, please come up to receive your pin, and please stay up here so we can have all the Rotarians receiving the award up here at the same time. And also, we said that we'd like to take a picture right after the meeting so that everyone could be in a photo. So the first person I'd like to call to the stage is Kay Atkins. She has a Paul Harris Fellow +1. Kay. Okay. You can come right up the steps over here. And number 2 is John Farmeyer with a Paul Harris Fellow +5. And if Johnny can come straight.
Good save, good save.
Well, they can.
This way.
All right.
Here,
All right.
I'll hand them out. You can keep things moving.
Okay. And number 3 on the list is Melinda Kelly for a Paul Harris Fellow +2. Then we have a fellow Rotarian who I believe is our president, okay? Steve King, and he's got a Paul Harris Fellow +3. I'm not sure you knew that, okay. All right, and Nancy Shula, I think she's related to me. She's got a Paul Harris Fellow +1. Nancy? And then Susan Wilkinson, Paul Harris Fellow +5. Then we do have some folks that have moved up to level 2 as a major donor. And I'd like to invite, and a major donor is a donation, cash donation of up to $25,000. And that's Ariel and Hux Miller. And if you're interested in level 3, that's $50,000. So we got some people working on it.
Pretty fancy boxes for the major donor. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you for your gift to the world. Oh. Bill Shula has been leading the effort and championing Rotary International and the Rotary Foundation for many years. It's obviously in his DNA and in his heart. He and Nancy are also being recognized today as Major Donor Level 2. Bill and Nancy. Do you have more to say, Bill?
Just a quick, again, want to thank our Rotarians that have been supportive of the International Foundation, as well as we have our Cincinnati Foundation. So it's working together to do all kinds of great things around the world and service around the world. Service above self, and we'll have a picture afterwards. And he's going to mention something else we're working on, Jefferson Award, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. You know, Rotary International and that foundation really makes us a global institution. This club has championed several successful global grants where local clubs from around the globe work together and get money leveraged from Rotary International Foundation to do spectacular things. And donations through the Paul Harris Society like this help make all that possible. Well said, Bill. It is a great effort and a community effort. Now, for an important announcement about the four-way test speech contest, welcome Lori Quinlivan, chair of the program.
Thanks, President Steve. So mark your calendars for the last Thursday in February. That's our four-way test speech contest, where you get to find out what kids these days are really thinking. So we have a contest going on right now at SCPA. We have a contest today at 3 o'clock with Walnut Hills, and the in-school contest at DePaul Cristo Rey is tomorrow morning. We've already got our winner from our new school to the contest this year, McNicholas High School in Anderson. So it's going to be a really great program, and this is a really good one to bring your guests to. Also, we've got some celebrity judges. So we've got sports and media this year. We've got former Bengals kicker Jim Breach, five-time All-Star baseball player and former Reds outfielder George Foster. Well, how about that? Longtime Channel 9 anchor Julie O'Neill, and current Channel 9 Cincy Lifestyles reporter Michaela Hughes Shaw, and finally, the guy who's in charge of deciding what the Inquirer is going to editorialize about, Kevin Aldridge. So remember, the last Thursday, the 23rd, invite guests. And if you're on the committee, we are going to meet at the Queen City Club right after lunch next week. Thank you.
Mark your calendars. The four-way speech contest is one of the highlights of the year. It's always really inspiring to see these young, really contest winners delivering their speech for our benefit. Now, a few announcements. This meeting is generously sponsored by Rotarian John Farmeyer of UBS Financial Services. John, thank you for your sponsorship. We have many birthdays, including a few today. We wish you all happy birthday. Jessica, Emily, Jody, Brian, Jim, Abby, Lydia, Nancy, Ellen, and Jim. But I think Jody's here today. Happy birthday, Jody. Members in the news. The Hamilton County Developmental Disabilities Service Board has selected Rotarian Andy Magenheim as its new president. Andy, round of applause for Andy. Andy has served as the HCDDS board since 2012, most recently as vice president. Thank you, Andy, for your service, and congratulations on the new position. There, you have a wave, Andy. There you go. I was like trying to spot you. Congratulations, Andy. Family of Rotary. We recently learned the sad news that past President Dean Gowden's wife, Lou Gowden, passed away on January 23rd. Keep the Gowden family in your thoughts and prayers. And in good news, Rotarian Bruce Jeffrey and wife Brittany welcome baby boy Miles Lennox Jeffrey on Friday, February 3rd. All right, we got a picture. Hey, well, isn't that a beautiful family? Look at that little baby. Oh my gosh, that is just so precious. Congratulations, Bruce. All right, split the pot. Mr. Pepper, could you help us pick a winner? All right. Today's pot is $51, but the rolling pot is up to $1,274. Last four digits are 8920. 8920. All right, Mary. All right. Well, congratulations, Mary. We all want to know, you're going to pull the Queen of Hearts. Better luck next time. Sorry, so close, Mary. Three brief announcements. We have Jefferson Award nominations are due tomorrow, Friday, the 10th at 5 p.m. If there are any of your nominees who are still trying to finish their nomination forms, urge them to get it done by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Our next Club 17 Hands-On Service project will be at Habitat for Humanity on Saturday, February 18th. Details are in the calendar of DAC-DB, February 18th. And RSVP for the Rotary Club Night at FC Cincinnati, Saturday, April 22nd. RSVP and DAC-DB. One final note, next week we are not at the Hilton. You heard Lori Quinlivan mention that. Maybe these wise guys are kicking out all of us from the Hilton next week as well. I don't know, they haven't told me, but we're moving the whole show to the Queen City Club next week. So one other piece of housekeeping there is parking available at the Queen City lot. It is $5, and DAC-DB will be collecting that $5 payment for anyone who'd like to park in the Queen City parking lot. All right, that's enough of announcements. I'd like to turn the program over to Jim Neidhard to introduce our speaker, Mr. Neidhard.
Thank you, President Steve. It's a real honor to introduce today's guest speaker, David Pepper. I was working on my speech. I gave it to my wife, and she came up to me and gave me a kiss and said, "Keep it simple, stupid." And so, anyway, I think everybody has seen David's bio in the E-Rays. Very impressive, fifth-generation Cincinnatian. I'm guessing that maybe some of the folks here in the crowd, maybe their children, maybe their grandchildren are here because of David's grandfather, Dr. Stanley Garber, renowned Cincinnati OBGYN. But anyway, you've all seen David's resume on the E-Rays. and I'm not going to repeat it. The one thing that really stuck out to me was at the very end. I don't know if you saw that. David spent any number of years in the early '90s in St. Petersburg, Russia, and he had any number of interactions with then Vice Mayor Vladimir Putin. And so the good news is obviously none of these interactions went sideways because David's still here. So anyway, without any further ado, it is my real honor to introduce David Pepper.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you for having me. I worry about that story, though, because if it did go sideways, what did happen, then I'm still here. But it's okay. People know about this. I am so honored to be back here. A lot of you would have been here the last time I was here, which was, believe it or not, 2009. And I was very proud. And I've been so moved by your commitment to service over the years that not only did I create kind of having seen Charlie Lucan do them so successfully, the state of the county speech, but you remember I brought it here. And the last, believe it or not, 14 years ago, the podium was over here, but it was the same group. So I'm really honored to be back here. And I brought it here because, as I said, I've always been moved by your commitment to service, by your four-way test. I was telling my dad on the way over here earlier today, that I was speaking. He goes, I was in the room giving a speech to the group, I don't know when, and he said, I had to rewrite my speech once I heard about the four-way test because it really framed what I wanted to say. So it's great to be back, and I know this group well enough to know that you are looking forward to an incredibly partisan rant, right? Big political speech. I'm going to spare you that today. You'll be glad to know. I want to do something that I don't do very often and kind of walk through the journey I've been on since I was here 14 years ago. And as the title sort of hinted at, what I've learned along the way, which my hope is kind of a series of lessons that I think and I hope are relevant to writing, which I've done a lot of, politics, which we all think about a lot these days, and if I could be so bold, life itself. Because if what you're going to hear in the next 20 or so minutes, if I knew I was 14 years ago I'd be saying it, I wouldn't have believed it. Because it's been an interesting journey. So within a few months of my state of the county speech here, I actually had been recruited to run for a position called the Auditor of the State of Ohio. Most of you will have forgotten about that election, even if you ever even knew about it. But I was convinced to run for state auditor because in addition to the exciting work of auditing government around the state auditor also is one of the positions on the board that draws the districts of the state of Ohio, the state house districts. And pretty quickly, although I had never really thought about it, it became very clear to me how important that is. The districting of the state, the districting of Congress, those districts determine whether or not you have a competitive and representative democracy or whether everything's predetermined. So I decided when I was asked to think about running for that, yeah, that's so important, I'm going to run for it. And I ran for it. I ran as hard as I could. And the thing I discovered, in addition to the importance and how bad the districting can get, which we're seeing around the country, we can talk about that, I also learned something else. No one had any idea what I was talking about when I said I was running to deal with gerrymandering. Nobody. It was so bad that I'd give a speech I'm a Democrat, I'd give a speech in front of a bunch of Democrats, and the Democratic big shots would say afterwards, David, why are you talking about gerrymandering? Nobody cares. No one knows what you're talking about. I kept talking about it, by the way, but ultimately, 2010 was a tough midterm for Democrats. Some of you here would mourn that day. Others, I'm sure, were celebrating. I didn't win. But I never forgot that this incredibly important thing that I cared so much about, no one even knew about, even though it literally shapes the democracy of our state and our country in the end. It was sobering to figure that out. So I left the county. I was at a law firm. There was an issue ballot in 2012 that also was about gerrymandering. It was going to create an independent group of people that would draw the districts as opposed to the politicians, which actually is a pretty good system. And so I campaigned hard for that. I ran around the state. I debated guys like Bill Seitz. I was a surrogate at the chamber and debated it. It got blown out of the water. Again, no one had any idea what we were talking about. And it didn't succeed. And this is where my story takes an odd turn for a politician. I thought to myself, after the second failure of an issue that's so critical to our world that no one knows about, I thought to myself, I'm going to write a book about this topic. But then I thought, and this is the part that's a little bit of a curveball, I thought, I'm going to write a novel about it. I'm going to write a novel about gerrymandering. Now that's when a lot of you who know much about the book business should be laughing. That may be the worst idea for a novel of all time. Who wants to read about that? Okay, well, I didn't care. Yeah, yes, a few of you may. I know some of you. And I thought, so I'm going to start this book, and it's going to be an election in Ohio, and it goes kind of screwy, and it turns out it's because of gerrymandering. And I did the first thing that any of you who ever writes a book should do: send the chapters you're writing to your mother, because she will always like them. So I started sending my mom, and I copy my dad, and I say, Mom, and this was the right question to ask. I'd say, Mom, what do you, and she's pretty political. She would read a novel about gerrymandering. I'd say, what do you think of this chapter? She'd always write back, keep going, it's awesome. So I kept writing, and I kept writing my novel about gerrymandering. A few months in, though, I figured out, this is a little bit dry. I'm kind of making it exciting. So, and Jim mentioned this, I thought, I got to add a little more drama. So I went back to my Russia days, and I added maybe about 8 chapters in the first big plot twist. It wasn't an American who figured out how to affect an American election because of gerrymandering. It was a Russian oligarch. And I based my character on Vladimir Putin, who I did interact with many times. And by the way, this was all in like 2012 and 13, before anyone ever thought Russia may even think about doing this. I was basically trying to pep up my book about gerrymandering. So I'm writing, but at some point I figure out I better get feedback beyond my mom. But I'm really glad that she likes it so much. So I sent it to at this time I have one son. I'm basically writing, I'm the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party. I'm driving around the state, and I'm like typing around this book at like 6 in the morning or 10 at night or in the car if someone's driving me. I'm not writing a book how anyone should write a book. But I decide I'm going to venture out and be brave enough to share the book with other people. And I sent it to one guy who ended up being the #1 student at UC Law School, great young man. He, at that time, was a young staffer for the party. And he said to me very nicely, David, I read a lot of thrillers. And I know that's what you're trying to write. Most of the thrillers I read have dialogue in them. And I thought, you're right. I was about 70 pages into this amazing book about gerrymandering, but no one was talking. I was describing them talking, but I wasn't actually having them talk. I thought, God, that's a good point, Carson. His name was Carson Miller. And I go to the bookstore, which I did many times, and I buy a book about how to write good dialogue, and I start, again, pepping up my novel with some good dialogue. Okay, I keep writing. I call another guy, a friend of mine, a best-selling author. Now he's actually famous because he's a very well-known COVID denier. His name is Alex Berenson. Anyone ever heard of Alex Berenson? He's actually always on Fox News. He's a friend of mine from Yale undergrad. We were on the Daily News together. He also happens to be a best-selling thriller writer. So I call up Alex, and I say, Alex, I'm really charging through this book, and my mom really likes it, and I love this story. How do I, get it out in the world? And Alex says to me, tell me about your book. And for the next 10 minutes, I described most of what I just described to you. Well, there's a plot about gerrymandering. The Russian does this and this and this. And about 8 minutes in, he stops me and he says, David, you've got a lot of work to do on your book. I'm like, what do you mean? Isn't that exciting, the plot? And he said, you just described your book for 8 minutes. And not one time did you describe anything about your main character. Nothing. And he said, people will read just about any plot if they really like the character, if they feel the character. But man, if you don't care about the character, you won't read anything. And you didn't tell me anything about your main character. You only talked about this plot. And that's not a good book. He was right. I go back and start, I rewrote it to add all that dialogue, right? Now I'm rewriting to really make you think about my main character, who's a reporter for the Youngstown Vindicator, who discovers this crazy plot that happens because of gerrymandering. So I rewrite the book with much more attention on Jack Sharp, the main character. Then I talked, and by the way, a lot of this is sort of the friends and family plan of how you write a book. So then I talked to some other friends of mine from the publishing business, and I say, with the character emphasis and all the dialogue, I say to some other friends, hey, who in the business, how do I move this forward now that I've written this book? Again, I have no vision of what you're supposed to do in publishing. And they say, David, what you need now is a really good agent. These are also friends from college. And they said to me, and you know that one of our classmates from college is one of the most famous agents in the world. And I'm thinking, I'm there, I'm in. So I write this agent, his name is Simon. And I say to Simon, hey, I was talking to Todd and they told me to send you an email, and will you read my book? Because I think it's great. And he says, I will read the book. And again, this is an old friend. I didn't know him in college, by the way, but old classmate, he's going to get me in the game, right? He writes me back a few months later, and this, if you've ever been in publishing, they decline you in very passive-aggressive ways. He says, I had to read your book, and we're just not seeing it with us, or we'll pass. Like, they never say you've been rejected. They just say it very nicely. And then I made one of the great mistakes I could have ever made, although it turned out well. I said to Simon, I hear you. This is not the book for you, as he kind of wrote. Do you have any other agents that you think I could take my book to get it sort of delivered to the public? Here is the meanest email I've ever received in my life. Dear David, if you can forgive my bluntness, the work that is needed to make the book successful is not the kind that any agent can help you with. It's not a simple matter of structural changes, but a question if you're going through a long and painful education in the craft of fiction. On and on. This is after my mom has liked the book. It's after I've been writing this book for 2.5 years about gerrymandering, and Simon is basically saying his final line is, best of luck, I'm sorry to be so broad and far-reaching in my critique. And for a few days, I just thought, I'm terrible at this. This is a professional, he knows, and he just told me, nobody can save you, you're that bad. But I'm a resilient person. I've been through ups and downs and losses and wins, and I thought, after a couple days, I said, you know what, let me reread, because I skipped a lot of what he wrote. There was a lot more of what he wrote. But I actually dove in, and I said, okay, I'm not going to accept the absolute message of don't do this anymore. Let me learn from what he wrote. And he actually did write, and the reader who passed wrote that they didn't feel connected to my characters. Although I had spent time on Jack Sharp, that character, they didn't feel connected as much as they should. And I went back to Joseph Beth, and I bought more books on character writing. And I read it a little more closely, and I converted the entire book from third person to first person. All of a sudden, it was all about I, because I wanted to get into the character. And every other character, and this was a good criticism, although harshly worded. All the other characters, I was kind of just jumping in between. You never got to know them. So I rewrote the book, and you'll see this in a lot of writing, so that every other chapter began with a third-person character, but you only saw what that character would see. Think of it as a camera on their shoulder. So I rewrite the whole book having learned about writing character. Now I'm going to skip ahead because I know you guys are tough on time, but I rewrite the book again. That took a long time. I wrote it to Simon again, not interested still. But I had other friends say, this is the moment where you need a good freelance editor, and I know one, and so they recommended me, and this young woman, who's a phenomenal editor, loves politics. So she said, I'll take a look at your book. And so she edits a book every month. And she read through my book. She actually started to like my book. And she gave me some really good advice about writing, and this will be for those of you who are writers. One advice was, if you want to have a book that is a page-turner, start every chapter late and end every chapter early. Get into the action. Get out of it quickly. Don't waste the reader's time with all sorts of setup. I won't go through details on that, but she gave me great advice on that. She also said, David, so much of this book is about your opinion. Get that. That's not a novel. That's not a story. Get your opinionating out. Let the opinion come through the storytelling. I also read another book that said to me, you want to, like the Russia-Putin part, the best thing to write about is your lived experience. But it's not the facts of that experience that really connect with people. It's connecting the emotion you felt at that moment in your life to the reader. And so one of the scenes, I don't have enough time to go through this, but 2 years into meeting with Putin, he never spoke a word of English, and then in one meeting, the translator messed up a word into English, and he corrected her in English. And we all thought, my God, he's been speaking English this whole time. What have we been saying in front of this man? That is, if you read my first book, The People's House, I have a scene about that, and you feel the emotion of, my God, this guy, we didn't know he spoke English. Capture the emotion. That's how you make people think about your story, not just facts and figures. So I'll just further forward. I keep writing. I never get an agent. I never get a publisher. I find a company in the central Ohio that is a wonderful company. I'll give a recommendation if anyone ever writes anything. My dad uses it all the time. They publish it, and it's very affordable, and I got it out in the world. And people actually like the book. I sent it to some well-known people. They liked the book. All of a sudden, I had blurbs. And then something crazy happened. I sent it out from my own home to newspapers across the country, hey, hoping for a review, which never happens to a book without a publisher, without an agent. And all of a sudden, I got the article here, November of 2016, my emails start blowing up. David, what in the world? How did that happen? And I said, what are you talking about? Have you not seen the Wall Street Journal? And the cover of the book section of the Wall Street Journal is an article called A Sleeper Candidate. And the sleeper candidate is my book. And the article says, David, I don't even remember how they got the book. David Pepper's lively, thought-provoking novel, The People's House, blah, 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 emerges as a sleeper candidate for Political Thriller of the Year, based on everything I just talked about. So, of course, within a day, I emailed Simon back. I linked to the article. I said, not sure if you saw this, but I got a hell of a review in the Wall Street Journal. I said they literally called it, quote, a sleeper candidate for political thriller, and a political thriller, and I included the link, and then I wrote, your early critiques were a big help, so thank you. Sales in the last week have had it in the top 2,000 on Amazon. I'm working on a sequel. Let me know if you'd be interested in discussing. He was not interested. He's a big he was so depressed about the Trump election, he said, I don't ever want to see a book about politics again. So on and on, I'll get to some of the take-home points, but after this is when so much of the Russia story came out. So within a year, and again, I added Russia to drama up a book about gerrymandering. A year after this, I get another article. As I'm rolling out my sequel, I get another article. The thriller that predicted the Russia scandal. Politico magazine. I get a call after that from Judy Woodruff. How in the world? Because my book really does get into the details of a Russian oligarch rigging an American election. I used to get feedback when it first came out, could that really happen? A year later, it was, what did you know? How did you know that? That's what Judy Woodruff interviewed me about. I was on her show, and the thing I learned very quickly about her show is her viewers buy books online. And 2 years after launching it, The People's House, which was my ironic name about gerrymandering, launched to like number 18 on Amazon, which if you're a book, if you did it the way I did it, that's the only way you're really getting sales. And 2 days after that, I get a call, as I'm still chairing the party, now raising 2 kids, I get a call from New York area code, and I pick up the phone, and the person says, "Hi, this is Ilya. The president wants to talk to you. Can you wait 2 minutes?" My first thought is, we've got Obama, former president, Trump. I'm like, which president are we talking about? But then I figured out, as I waited for those 2 minutes, I literally thought, this has got to be Bill Clinton. He loves reading thrillers. And 2 minutes later, that's who it was. And for the next hour and a half, this was right at the end of him writing a book called The President is Missing. Some of you may have read that book. For the next hour and a half, Bill Clinton and I talked about writing and politics. And he said to me, because he said, "David, I picked up your book after seeing that Judy Woodruff thing. I picked up both your books, and I literally couldn't put them down, and I'm halfway through the second already. I picked them up yesterday." And then he said to me in sort of a sneaky way, "I see what you're doing with this Jack Sharp character. He's an investigative reporter. That means he can always find new scandals for you to write about." I said, "That's exactly right, Mr. President." Then he started giving me ideas on scandals to write about. No joke. I actually was the one who had to go. I had a lunch at 12:30, but I kind of stood outside the restaurant finishing my call with Bill Clinton. So on and on and on. I'll just say this. From there, and then Clinton wrote a column about 2 months later, and he literally wrote this long column about when he laid his book out, about his favorite writers, and he put in William Faulkner, James Baldwin, David Baldacci, and he goes, "I also look for writers whose works are not that well known yet, like David Pepper." That was great. And after all that notoriety, I'll just say, my sequel I did the same way, but after all that, I got the agent, and I got the publisher, and that ended up leading to third, fourth books published by Putnam. And then finally, after all was said and done, and some of you will know this book, I wrote a nonfiction book about gerrymandering called Laboratories of Autocracy, incorporating all the lessons. I wouldn't have written it the same way if I hadn't written all these novels and learned all those lessons, because it's all about storytelling and emotion. It's not some dry book about gerrymandering. So I just want to go through and think about this. This is a long story, I know. But what did I learn since I was here last, going through this sort of bizarre journey as I was, again, raising 2 kids with my wife, Alana, and chairing the party? The most important thing I've learned, and I've done this now, I started painting a couple years ago too, by the way, try new things. Just try them. My biggest regret in life is I didn't start writing that book 10 or 15 or 20 years before. Clearly I had it in me to write something. I just didn't think about doing it. And I started painting because I had a bad back and had surgery a few years ago. I love painting now too. I've actually been in art shows. If you had told me when I was standing on the stage 14 years ago I'd be painting paintings and writing books, I never would have believed you. I was a political hack, and that's it. I never thought of the other stuff. Try new things. You never know what your passion is. You never know what you actually may be good at. I just started writing a novel. Look where it went. Number 2, do not let the Simons of this world stop you. I'll talk about the second. It was too harsh, that email. That email was saying, don't do this. We should never tell people that. But if someone tells you that, especially when you're venturing to something outside your comfort zone, which this was, don't listen. Keep going. It took me a few days, but then I bounced back. But number 3, really important. I didn't just dismiss Simon's email. I actually, after recovering, I took a few minutes and I read it closely. And his critique was exactly right. He should have said it more politely. You may get sort of blocked, but always listen to the critiques, in writing, but everything else. And I listened to Carson about dialogue, and I listened to Alex, who I couldn't disagree more with, about vaccines on plot and character. And I listened to Simon's brutal email about how to make people really feel that character. His critique was exactly right. And you know what? Even though it was a little snarky, when I wrote that email that said, your early critiques were a big help, so thank you, that actually was 100% true. I had one of the best, I don't want to give him too much credit here because it was a mean email, but I had one of the best agents in this country take the time to read my book. That actually was a huge service. And so whenever you're doing anything, writing or something else, and people take the time to actually dig into it, and they're honest enough to tell you, you can improve this, I cannot tell you how valuable this is. Every single tough interaction I had along the way in writing that first book taught a lesson I incorporated in every other book since. Next, and this is for political but also others, Alex Berenson's quote to me, "Focus on the character and not the plot," applies to everything. And it especially applies to politics. People will follow just about anyone in politics regardless of the political position. And if that person has no authenticity, the position doesn't matter. You know, I saw a few years ago someone named Avtab Purvel have the single largest crowd when he was sworn into clerk of courts, which no one cared about on the Democratic side the year before. It was because it was him, and he was inspiring, and his story inspired, and he told it well. Life's all about people's stories and their character. And that's sort of what inspires people. And too often we get all caught up in the plot and forget that really important insight. A couple other ones. You know, the advice that I had too much sort of opinion and not enough storytelling in the early versions of the novel, that's true of all communications as well. You don't really connect to people by trying to debate facts and figures. We like to think that way. But you connect through, you know, gut-level emotion. And that's true in writing. That's true in everything else. And finally, I also think we communicate best through storytelling. And that initial novel I had with all sorts of my opinions about gerrymandering wasn't nearly as effective as in the end when I actually wrote a novel about this story that told itself. And my brothers are not that political. Both of them read my book. They liked the story. And they said at the end of the story, "David, God, that gerrymandering is pretty bad, isn't it?" I thought, I did it! I got my brothers to read a book about gerrymandering. But it was the story that took them through it versus everything I might have said about it over Thanksgiving dinner or something else. Let me just close on and as I said, all that helped me write this nonfiction book that I've been kind of running around talking about for about a year. In a way, I had a Time magazine reporter, because this has gotten more attention than any of the fiction novels. He said, "Congratulations, David. You wrote the first book about state houses. It's interesting to read." And it's because I incorporated all those lessons I had learned over 10 years of writing fiction. Let me just close, though, by also saying about politics, and I promise I'm not going to be a political person here, but my first book is literally this crazy, at the time it felt like a crazy plot. A Russian hacking an American election through voting machines and no one doing anything about it. And one guy knew about it and decided he would take advantage of it to get ahead politically. And I thought what I was writing was a crazy plot that could never happen. Okay, I was trying to point out the institutional problems with gerrymandering, but the plot I thought was getting a little bit nuts. You know, a couple years later, I would start to get critiques of the book. Some people didn't realize by the way, some people thought I wrote it after 16, so they're like, "Way to go, Sherlock, a Russian hacks an election, nice plot, buddy." I was like, "No, I wrote it before. I wrote it before it happened." But the other thing I'd get was, "David, your book is so unrealistic." And I'd say, "That's funny, because it's actually some of what happened in real life is somewhat like my book." They're like, "No, your book is unrealistic, because at the end, when everyone discovers this crazy plot that happened, Republicans and Democrats call a special committee to try and solve the problem, and that would never happen." And when I wrote the book, I honestly thought that is what would happen. In 2012 and 13, 14, as I was writing, that was actually the part of the book that felt, okay, this is what we would do if we discovered some big threat to our country. We would get together and solve it. And to close where I began, this does get us back. There are a lot of reasons for the brokenness in politics. We were joking about that, the whole State of the Union scene that was unlike we've ever seen in our lives. But a lot of it does get back to gerrymandering. And my hope is, you know, it is breaking down politics into little fiefdoms. It's really getting rid of accountability. It's creating all sorts of disincentives to work together, to actually, and this is the heart of what you do, the more we have gerrymandering, the less politics is about service at all. That's one of the hearts of the problems in politics, whatever side you're on. It ceased to be about service. And I hope that this is one, and there are a number of these things, but it's one of the issues. And again, the whole full circle, all my books are about this kind of stuff. I hope it is one of the issues that in the coming several years we can all work together to fix and get politics to be about service again, and this is a key step to do it. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. I hope it was informative, and you learned a little bit along the way. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions you guys want. Yeah, Bob? Yeah. That is a hard question. First, it is really hard to be a political thriller writer these days because it's hard to keep up with real life. I mean, I thought my plot was nuts. My second book is called The Wingman. It's all about people putting into a primary a false opponent to take out another candidate. That's actually happening too. Like, in Florida it happened. People are getting indicted for it. So it is really hard to keep up with it. The craziest, I wouldn't even pick a moment. I think that we're the frog in the boiling pot. And if you had told a lot of Americans 15 years ago that you'd have political violence, you'd have the what we saw the other day, all of it, they would say there's no way. That would not be American politics. So there are individual moments. Obviously, January 6th was shocking, and other things have been shocking. But it's the whole thing and the danger, and this is why I literally run around, and I spared you the hyper-partisan stuff or the democracy stuff. I worry sick that we are normalizing really broken politics. It's all kind of getting baked in. Young people, it's all they've ever seen or known, so they think it's normal. I was speaking to a group of interns about 5 years ago, and I said to them, and again, some won't like this, but I was saying, this campaign with Trump and Clinton, this isn't normal. It's so over the top. And this young woman, 19 years old, said, Mr. Pepper, this is normal for us. Since we were 11, the citizenship of our president was questioned. Partly because of the color of his skin, obviously. This is all we've known. And so I think the bigger risk is that it's all getting normalized. And I think we all have to find a way, especially those of us who remember, when, I'm going to age myself here, but when I was young, there were only 3 television shows about politics a week on Sunday morning. I didn't care if it was Warren Rudman on or Tim Wirth or Tim Russ interviewing them. Everything was kind of calm and normal. There wasn't even cable. That's going to make me sound old. There wasn't cable. There wasn't MSNBC, where you don't even know who the hosts are anymore, let alone the politicians. And I think we have to figure out how to, going back to what you do every day, and with the young people you'll be talking to, how do we get the youngest generation that is very close to only having ever seen crazy politics to see that, no, it is about service. And it wasn't that long ago that that's what it was. That's why I ran for city council. That's why I ran for county commission. That's why I presented in front of you. We have to make sure that all the crazy, and there's so much of it, does not get normalized long term, or whole entire generations will just assume that's what it's like. And by the way, once that's the case, it will only attract the people who want it to be crazy, and the people who want it to be about service will do everything but enter politics. So it gets worse and worse. I know we're at time. Oh, one more question? Is that okay? So I go through this in my book, okay? And, Ohio's law is that we have term limits for the state house. I respect the people having chosen that. Here's the challenge of term limits, and I go through this a lot in my Laboratories of Autocracy book. The lobbyists are not term limited. The bureaucracies are not term limited. So what happens when we term limit only the people's representatives? Now, there are a lot of people that I want to see go. They've been there too long. But when we structurally term limit only the people who represent the people, We're handing over state capitals like Columbus to the people who were there for 20 or 30 years. And the government's complicated. It took me a few years to figure out how the county or the city ran. The state house is even more difficult. So if people are only figuring out, what to do after 5 or 6 years and they're out after 8, who's running the place? Not the people's representatives. So I think I get in some cases, I'm fine with term limits. I think 8 years on city council makes perfect sense. But I also think there's a cost to term limits in these large state capitals, that the people now running these states actually aren't the state representatives. It's a whole lot of other people who aren't there having taken oath to the people of Ohio, but they're there serving other interests, private interests, other interests, and they run the show. And if you want to read more about that, that's what this nonfiction book's about. So I think it's lack of local public media is making things worse. Gerrymandering is making things worse. There are a lot of things making things worse. But term limits, although there's a benefit to them, is also leading to this sort of overwhelming of new and short-term state reps by a whole class of lobbyists and interests that are not term limited. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Stay here for just a second. David Pepper, thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts with this club. We are, many of us were here when you gave the State of the County address many years ago, those 14 years ago, and we really appreciate the friendship you've shown the Rotary Club of Cincinnati, and we hope you're back before 14 years next time, But what a great tale of resilience. I wrote down so many things. I gotta have a laugh about Bill Clinton giving you advice about scandals. Gotta have a laugh about that. But I really love the try new things, and I really loved your comment about getting back to public service, and it's all about service. We feel the same way. We obviously live by the four-way test here, and as a token of our appreciation for your presentation, we want to give you a Rotary Club of Cincinnati coin with the four-way test on the back, because it's how we live our motto of service above self. In addition, we're going to make a donation in your name to that End Polio Now campaign, right? We're in a 4-decade effort to try to eliminate wild polio. We're this close to eradicating that wild disease, and we need a little more effort for the final push. We hope you're back before 14 years, David, and I'm sure you have a few books, perhaps for an interested Rotarian. Let's give you another round of applause and appreciation. Couple of final announcements. We have a Board of Directors meeting in Salon G on the 4th floor. Environmental Sustainability Committee is meeting in the front of the room here, and the Hands-On Service Committee is meeting in that end of the room. Next week, don't come to the Hilton. We're going to be at the Queen City Club, where we will hear from Brigadier General Kimberly Peoples, U.S. Army, Great Lakes and Ohio River Division. Again, it's at the Queen City Club. Make it a great week. Meeting adjourned.